Tax season is over, but your most important financial work isn't. Today, discover 3 numbers that tell you if you're ready for summer or about how to scale a problem. And master how most owners skip this reset entirely and why that prevents you from having the summer that you should. Hello, and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. Today on the Bar Business Podcast, we are going to dive into 3 numbers you should know moving into summer. Tax season has basically ended. Q ended at the end of last month. So what should we be reviewing, and how should we be setting ourselves up for the best summer we've ever had? We're going to talk about prime cost, revenue per seat hour, or RevPASH, I should say, and your labor efficiency ratio, how to run them, what they mean, and how they can set us up for the future. Now, I think for a lot of bars, spring is a great season. January is a little slow, February is a little slow, but March always tends to pick up. We have college basketball tournaments. We have the weather improving. We have more people out and about. And so it's really easy right now to be very optimistic about the future. Some of us have busy summers, though, and some of us don't. It largely depends on where you are, what kind of bar you are, who is your guest. And what we want to avoid doing is having a busy summer and then a disappointing fall and not being where we need to be. So we're going to talk about 3 numbers that you can run in 48 hours that are already in your systems, or at least the data to get there is, and what we can do to use that to drive our business forward as we go into summer. So the first number we're going to look at is prime cost versus target. Now, we talked about prime cost a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into too much depth here. But for those of you who have not listened to the prior episodes about prime cost is COGS plus labor divided by your revenue. So COGS plus labor over revenue. What we're looking for in here generally is somewhere between about 55 and 60% for most bars. Depending on your actual business model, it could be as low as 50%, it could be as high as 65%. But almost 99 times out of 100, if you're talking about a prime cost in excess of 65%, you got a problem. If it's in excess of 70%, boy, do you have a problem. Even if you're in a place where summer volume is going to increase greatly, where your top line is going to increase greatly, it's not going to fix your broken margins. Revenue is not always the answer. And I think that's something we see a lot in this industry. Well, if I just had more revenue, I'd do better. Well, if your cost of goods sold is too high and you're overstaffing constantly, more revenue is just going to magnify your problem. It's not going to make it better. And the 2 big things to look at, especially if you're one of those bars that does more business in the summer than you do in, say, the fall or the winter or even spring, is poor cost creep and overscheduling. Now, poor cost creep, this is something I've run into a lot recently with a couple different clients I've been working with, where, okay, we know what our poor cost should be, our theoretical poor cost based upon what's gone out or been rung in through the POS system. And then we know our actual poor cost. What are the inventory counts telling us? And those are not lining up. And I think for a lot of us in ownership, our knee-jerk reaction is, well, somebody's stealing from us. Well, okay, maybe. But more likely than not, that poor cost is creeping up for one of 2 reasons. Your costs have gone up. Inflation is still a thing. Your suppliers have raised their prices and you haven't raised your prices. It's going to mean that you're making less and less money every time a bottle price from your supplier increases. But the other place where poor cost creeps up is when your team gets a little bit lackadaisical about how they're pouring, and that 1.5 ounce pour becomes a 1.6 ounce pour. And that 1.6 becomes, it's 1.5 ounces, but really 1.5 ounces in your bar means somewhere between 1.6 and 1.8. You're kind of averaging a 1.75 pour. That's a huge change in your business model. So if prime cost is an issue, look at your pour costs. Look at your cost of goods sold and say, are we overpouring? Is there some lackadaisical attitude here about our standards? And do we need to get our standards for our cocktails and drinks in line to maintain the cost that we should have? The other big point on prime cost is going to be overscheduling. And I see this all the time. Matter of fact, I would dare to say almost every person I work with, every company I work with, has overscheduling somewhere in their model. When I had a bar, I did too. Like, it's natural. It feels better to not have people running around like crazy. It feels better as an owner, as a manager, to not have to be on the floor helping people out. But something I believe is very true. If the owner, if the manager doesn't have to fill in a little bit to get through the busy time, that means you're grossly overstaffed. Part of the reason management needs to be on the floor is to help things move properly, whether that's running drinks, stepping behind the server well for, a half hour to get through the big rush, getting ice. Unless there's some overcapacity for your team that manager has to fill, you're probably overstaffed. And if that doesn't make sense, shoot me an email. We can talk about it. But that really is something that you should not see as a failure of your model. You should see it as confirmation that you're using the correct model. The second stat I want you to look at is revenue per seat hour, Rev PAT. So what we're going to do is we're going to take total revenue divided by the number of seats in your establishment times the number of hours you are open. So if you're open 10 hours a day and you have 100 seats, you have 1,000 seat hours a day. And if your revenue is $2,000, you made $2 per seat per hour. And here's the thing about this. Busy doesn't always mean profitable. And what this metric allows you to do is to level set, and you can run this across different day parts, different weeks, different shifts, different hours of the day, which I tend to do, because it tells me what is my capacity, right? If I know my Rev Pash on the busiest Friday night, say you St. Patrick's Day, that just happened last month, as a marker, you were probably really, really busy. Most bars were. That's getting an understanding of what is my absolute capacity. And then you can say, okay, where am I furthest from this? Where am I closest to this? What can I do to move lower Rev Pash periods to a higher Rev Pash? When you see that lower Rev Pash number, knowing what your high Rev Pash is by using things like St. Patrick's Day, New Year's Eve, Halloween, those really busy nights, what you're unlocking is these are areas where there's potential. And Rev Pash by itself, it can be getting more butts in seats, right? That's going to raise your revenue per available seat hour. It can also be increasing your guest check average. That is going to raise your revenue per available seat hour. There are multiple levels we can pull here, but you need to know your numbers. You need to understand what your capacity is, and you need to question how can we get closer to capacity across every shift. There's a lot of strategy involved there, but it is doable. And quite frankly, don't bite off more than you can chew. Say, my Rev Pash on Friday night is $7. My Rev Pash on Tuesday night is $2. I want to focus on getting Tuesday closer to 7. How do I do that? Bite it off in little chunks, execute, and test. One of the things that I know I've talked about before, but I think is really important to mention here again, is think back to high school chemistry. Hypothesis, experiment, review your results against your hypothesis, then try again. Everything in business can come down to kind of that experimental framework, because frankly, this is going to sound bad as a guy that talks to businesses for money for a living. None of us really know what we're doing. We have a good idea of what's going on. We think we understand, but we're making guesses, and we need to make that guess, run an experiment on that guess, and see if the guess was right or not. That's how we get better. And as much as I would love to say that all businesses are the same, they're not. Your community is not the same. Your neighborhood is not the same. Your business is not the same. So run the experiments, get the results, and iterate to make your business better. The last number I want you to look at is your labor efficiency ratio year over year. Total labor divided by total revenue times 100. Total labor divided by total revenue times 100. Compare Q1 of this year to Q1 of last year. If that number is getting worse, that's going to be indicative of schedule or training problems. If that number is getting better, that means your staff's being more efficient. If you're going into summer where you need to hire seasonal staff, if your system is broken, that seasonal staff is just going to make those breaks worse. Intrinsically, seasonal staff will never be trained as well or execute as well as long-term employees. Even the same seasonal staff coming back every summer compared to a year-round employee will not perform as well. It's about reputation. It's about time and grade. It's about experience. So you want to fix any labor efficiency issues you have now before hiring seasonal staff if you do that in summer. So to wrap us up for today, your prime cost is going to tell you if your margins can handle growth. Your revenue per seat hour, or RevPash, tells you if traffic is turning into money, and labor efficiency tells you if your team is ready to scale. All three numbers are already in your system, or you can pull the data. Everybody should have these numbers to pull. So pull them this week, take a look at them, and make sure you are set up for success coming out of Q1, going into Q2, and for what many bars is a busy summer period.